Hey, and welcome back to Bain's Bites. I'm Bain. So during the quarantine, everybody got into bread making and sourdough bread and things to burn time, but we're kind of starting to get back towards not a normal life, but a life. And I still love making bread from scratch, but don't have the time for sourdough. Or if you've ever been afraid to make dough from scratch, make it at home. This is an easy recipe you can do at home. Great for beginners, nothing complicated. Today we're going to be making some homemade rosemary focaccia. So the first thing you've got to do is get some active dry yeast. We're going to get a little bit of warm water. We're going to bloom the yeast together, and I'll show you how to do that. Okay. I measured out 1 1/3 cup water, and I want to make sure that water is warm. Not boiling, not super hot, but right at about 110. You can see we're at 110 and change. I've got 1 package of active dry yeast that I'm just going to open and add in. Along with the warm water and the package of yeast, I'm going to add about 2 teaspoons of honey. Just something for that yeast to eat on and start to activate. We'll just grab a spoon, give it a quick stir to make sure it's all mixed in. We're going to let this sit for about 10 or 15 minutes, and you'll see what happens next. It should start to form bubbles. And this will show you that your yeast is active and alive and good to go. So we'll give it a minute and we'll check back in. It's been about 15 minutes, and you can see our yeast is definitely alive. It's foamed up on top and it's ready to go. So we're going to add it to our stand mixer. And if you don't have a stand mixer, that's okay. You can do all this in a bowl by hand. It's just easier if you have one. The next thing we need is 3 1/2 cups of flour. So our cup measure only holds 2 cups at a time, so we'll start with that, and you want to add the flour in gradually. So we'll grab our stand mixer, we'll raise it up, we'll put it on low, and we'll start adding the flour little by little. So as it's mixing, if you need to, you can grab a spatula, mix the flour in a little bit so it all gets incorporated, and we'll keep it on low, let this mix in, we'll add in another 1 1/2 cups. Now it's started to come together, and the last thing we're going to add is a 1/4 cup of olive oil. You want to make sure with focaccia, since it's such a fancy bread, you get some good olive oil. It makes all the difference. So we'll turn the mixer back on. We're going to add a 1/4 cup of olive oil. Let that come together. And while it's mixing up, the last thing we need to add for the dough is 2 teaspoons of salt. We've got it all in there. I'm going to turn the mixer up to medium and let it knead the dough for 5 or 10 minutes till it kind of comes together. And you'll see what we mean here in just a second. So it's been about 5 minutes, the dough's starting to come together, and I took a sprig of rosemary and chopped it up real fine. You can put the rosemary on top of your dough, but I kind of like working it in here at the very end while it's mixing, so you get a little bit in every bite. We got our rosemary in. We'll go ahead and turn it back on for just another minute or 2. Let that mix in. Alright, it's been about 6 minutes, 7 minutes maybe. Our dough's mixed up. I'm going to take a little bit of flour and sprinkle it down on our workstation. Coat my hands up with it so they don't stick too bad. We're going to take the dough hook off. Peel the dough back from the hook. The dough's a little sticky, but we're going to take our spatula and roll it out onto the workstation just to make sure it's where I want it to be. Grab just a little bit more flour from my hands. Put some on top. Rub my hands one more time. It feels pretty good. It's elastic. It feels smooth, which is perfect. Just going to knead it here a couple times. That looks good. We'll shape it into a ball, but kind of pulling around the top to get a tight surface. We'll set it back right here. We're going to grab a big bowl, get some olive oil, coat the inside of it. Rub that in real good all the way around. Going to grab our dough. We'll place it down and then flip it over. Make sure it gets coated all the way around with some oil. Form it back up into a ball. We're going to wrap this up and we're going to put it in a warm place and let it proof for about an hour to 2 hours. I wrapped it in plastic wrap. We've got it oiled and covered. Now when I proof dough or bread or pizza dough or anything I'm making, I found a really good trick is to put it in the oven and just turn the light on. No heat, just the light. Let it sit in there. It's isolated, it's warm. We'll give this an hour, maybe 2. We'll check on it. We're looking for it to double in size. It's been just about an hour and you can see our dough has doubled in size, which is perfect. So the next step, I've got a 9x13. I use a disposable just because it's easy. You can use a Pyrex. You can form this by hand if you want. You can do whatever you want. But I'm going to take my 9x13 and put a bunch of olive oil in here. And it may seem like a lot, but that's kind of what makes focaccia taste so good. So we'll toss that around. Get the inside coated or the sides. We'll take our dough and roll it out here into the baking pan. Perfect. Now I'm going to take my fingers and get them a little oily, and we're just going to stretch this dough to fit the pan. Try to get it as even as we can. Sometimes the dough will fight you, and if it does, just let it sit for about 5 minutes, and you'll find once you come back, it'll stretch back with a lot less resistance. Now we're going to take it, flip it upside down, so we get the whole thing coated in olive oil. We'll stretch it out in our pan. That's looking pretty good. Get it even. All right, I'm happy with that. So the last step before we let it proof one last time is we're going to take our fingers and just work dimples into the dough. And as this proofs back up, it'll have a good spot for the extra olive oil and any toppings we want to put on there. Just give it lots of little dimples. Don't push all the way through, but just give it some texture like that. So we're going to get this covered up. We're going to put it back in the oven for 1 hour. You can bake this in the oven, but instead, we're going to do it on the Traeger. Add a little bit of smoke. For now, we're going to give it a second proof, and then we'll check back in with you.
Eventually.
It's been another hour. As you can see, the dough rose about twice the size it was when we put it back in. All the dimples are still there, but filled in. I fired up the Traeger, and we're going to get it on some smoke. I've got it on the highest setting. It's sitting about 450 degrees. If you want to do this at home, you can just preheat your oven while you're waiting for this to proof. Before we put it on the smoker, I'm going to add just a little bit of coarse sea salt. So we'll sprinkle some of that on top. Maybe a little bit more. We'll go get it on the Traeger. The smoker's sitting right at 450, so we're going to go ahead and throw it on. Today we're using apple pellets. It's got a light flavor, light smoke. Should come out pretty good. I'm excited to try it. Hey Siri, set a 15-minute timer. That looks good. Alright, shut this down. Take it inside. So it was on for about 20 minutes. It's golden brown. You see the edge is crispy. It looks great. We're going to pull it out and get it onto a cooling rack. Let it cool off for a little bit. While it cools, I'm going to put just a little bit more olive oil across it. Let it kind of soak in as it cools off. And then we'll give it a try. Alright, I can't wait any longer. The bread's all done. Let's slice into it and see how it is. Looks good. You can see the bottom's good and crispy. Got a couple pieces and grab just some good olive oil. Let's give it a try. We did it. Just the faintest hint of smoke. Easy, no problem. That's great. So if you're afraid of baking bread at home, try this out. It's really easy, it's really simple, anybody can do it. If you like what we're doing, like the video and subscribe to the channel. As always, y'all have a great day. You gotta come try it. That's good.